Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I'd love to give you all a hug and just welcome you to the channel because you're all very special. And if you're new to the channel, I'd like to remind you that Saroy means Sasquatch are real. Oh yes, just in case you're new, because sometimes people want to know what Saroy means. So that's what it means. But I'm so thrilled you've joined me tonight. And we're now at part 2 of our story. So if you haven't heard part 1, click on the description because all our stories are so fabulously wound up together with all kinds of threads. And you don't appreciate the full tapestry until you see all the threads wound up together very nicely and you learn about all the characters. And let's get started with part 2 of our story. I had decided that me and my husband should spend our 2nd anniversary celebration in the heart of the North Carolina countryside, not too far from our urban home in Greensboro. My husband worked in accident and emergency and did not want to be stuck in a car driving for hours on end to get to another destination, when here in North Carolina there are many treasures to be found. We have sprawling countryside, alpine meadows, wood groves of tall lofty trees, lakes, streams, waterfalls, and a plethora of indigenous wildlife. Suffice to say, you didn't have to drive too far out of Greensboro to meet up with a world within a world, much like those Russian dolls you get that fold up into each other. I believe with a hectic work schedule, Luke wanted to unwind and relax, so an adventure not too far away from home would mean little travelling time, and that's a huge plus. I had decided to rent a little cabin in the woods for our weekend, as we were celebrating our 2nd wedding anniversary, and I wanted to make it special for the both of us. We had decided that every year we would take turns to choose a surprise location where we would celebrate our anniversary. This year I was choosing that place, which I was keeping a surprise from Luke. I was searching industriously online, and I stumbled across this enchanting little cabin. It looked like a treasure. It was practically winking at me from the computer screen. My face broke out into a triumphant wide smile. This would be the perfect place for the two of us. I just hoped it wouldn't be too expensive. The caption read, "Fancy a fabulous weekend away in a fully kitted out romantic cabin with large open fireplaces and sumptuously cozy decor, where you'll be surrounded by trees and serenaded by wildlife. If so, give Pippa a call on 55673912. Hello, Pippa speaking, came the voice at the end of the phone. Hello, Pippa. I'm calling about your cabin in the woods that you advertised online. I was wondering if it's available for this weekend. You're joking, right? Said the woman. You have to book the cabin weeks in advance. I'm afraid we're booked up until the beginning of next year. Pippa took down my details in case there was a cancellation any time during the year, which she assured me was unlikely to happen. I remember my heart plummeted as I returned to the computer to research for an alternative place to celebrate our anniversary. My heart was heavy, with that hollow, vacuous feeling when you know that any other replacement option you look for is just not going to be the same, like having to pick the chocolate eclairs in the bakery when your eye has been on the Boston cream pies all along, but they've all been sold out, so you're going to have to resign yourself to settle for something that you never actually wanted. I felt so defeated. Nothing measured up to the cabin I'd seen online. What was I thinking? I shouldn't be surprised that such a fabulous-looking place would be booked up months in advance. I should never have expected a place like that to be available at a moment's notice. I was consoling myself with some soothing, positive self-talk, but the bitter disappointment I felt was all-consuming, and I found myself clicking through all the places online with less than an enthusiastic focus. The cabin would have been so perfect for our weekend getaway, so romantic for our 2nd anniversary, but it had slipped through my hands like butter. Why did it have to be booked up? All of a sudden my cell phone rang quite abruptly. I glanced down briefly at the caller ID, and I recognized the strange phone number. It was the woman I'd spoken to moments before, calling me back. My heart began to pound excitedly in my chest. If Pippa was phoning me, this had to be a good thing, surely. Hello, I said. Hello there, is that Haley? It's Pippa speaking. I spoke to you only a moment ago. I honestly don't know how to explain this to you, but we've had a last-minute cancellation for the cabin this weekend, and that never happens. Do you have a magic lamp or something with a genii that you've been rubbing very hard?" she teased. "For some reason it seems serendipitous, I think. You're meant to obviously stay at the cabin, if you still want it, of course." "That would be wonderful," I said. "We will take it. And for the record, no, I don't have a magic lamp." Pippa laughed. "I'm not sure you're telling me the truth. You've got to have a magic lamp." I hasten to say, we've not had cancellations in years, so you got lucky, I guess. The journey to the cabin that Friday afternoon had been a pleasant one. The roads had not been congested, and the traffic had almost had a musical flow to it. The drive had been so scenically beguiling, and the rich colours of the countryside absolutely spectacular. There was none of the fatigued, restless legs you get from awkwardly sitting in one position for hours on end. Let's just say an hour and 40 minutes from home was not any skin off our nose. I must confess, when we arrived at the cabin, I privately congratulated myself for discovering this magic little hideaway, tucked among the trees, surrounded by luxurious carpets of gold and red leaves. It was fall, my absolute favourite time of the year, when the rich red golds and burnt amber colours that littered the landscape so resplendently could take your breath away, and the colours of the trees in the wood grove were no exception. The shimmering glaze of the soft sun cast her late afternoon shadows over the cabin in a very flattering light. A soft breeze was blowing, so the trees rustled and shook their boughs, and the falling leaves floated off the branches like celestial butterflies, so the enchanting little cabin looked like a bride on her wedding day, being covered in confetti sprays of pretty petals. It was like looking at one of those glass globes that you shake, with a Christmas scene in it, ever so pretty. The wood grove was bursting with the cheerful tweets and trills of the pretty bird song. In the distance we could hear the crashing sounds of an obstreperous stream. I'm not the type to blow my own trumpet with a pompous self-congratulation, but it was hard not to get a little puffed up and conceited about having chosen a place as idyllic and prepossessing as this one. Dare I say, Hans Cooper Andersen might have been inspired creatively to describe a place like this in one of his fairy tales. When Luke climbed out of the driver's seat of his white Hyundai, which he'd parked next to the cabin, wearing his olive-coloured chinos and a warm matching sweater, he stood there for a brief moment, taking it all in, drinking in the fabulous scenery, as if he was diving into a luscious double-thick chocolate malt milkshake with gusto, savouring its rich creaminess, allowing it to melt over his tongue, and its cool smoothness to caress the back of his throat. I did not interrupt his revelry, as he stood there caught up in the magic for a long while, almost as if his mind was floating on the wind, like one of the falling leaves. He turned around and ran his hand through his bouncy brown curls that framed his boyish face, while his spirited brown eyes glinted at me mischievously, as if the tired doctor within him had been vanquished and replaced by an ebullient boy. It would seem this magical place had teased us deliciously with a nostalgic wistfulness that brought out the child in the both of us, and that was confirmed later when me and my husband chased each other around the wood grove like a couple of rambunctious kids. We also played hide and seek, which I haven't played since I was a 10-year-old child, and engaged in a pillow fight where white feathers went flying all over the place like ethereal confetti. I don't believe either of us have laughed or giggled so much before. What was this place doing to us? I truly felt as if I was 7 again. On seeing the cabin for the very first time, I do believe the first words he uttered were, "You did good, Haley. How am I ever going to beat this when I choose a place for us next year? This cabin is a dream." I swelled with pride, like a dry sponge being thrown into a large body of water and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I couldn't help myself. This place was dreamy, and I had hit the jackpot finding a gem like this. In some strange way, I believe I was serendipitously guided here, as if everything had fallen miraculously into place for us to stay here for the weekend. What was the chance of a place so heavily booked up being cancelled at the very last minute? I never let Luke know about the cancellation, or how close we came not to staying in this place. Some secrets are best not shared, for they might demean the magic, and I didn't want that to happen. We found the key to the cottage underneath a brand new welcome mat, and opened the door. It opened with rather a creak. The inside was equally as charmed. The cabin was small and intimate, but that made it all the more cosy for us. The main living area boasted a large fireplace. There were walnut bookshelves bursting with books, forming a wall on one side of the living room. The kind of sumptuous couches that are as comfortable as a bed, covered in a scattering of very colourful cushions. The bright colours of the decor brought out the dark colours of the old timber beams. The polished wooden floors were bedecked with rich Turkish rugs, and there were vases of fresh flowers and bowls of fruit on the coffee table. Ostensibly, the whole cabin had been tastefully done, but the bathroom boasted a fabulous bathtub the size of a small pool. Fluffy towels, pretty little baskets containing high-end toiletries from shampoos and soaps bought from Macy's. Let's just say the king-size bed in the main bedroom was like falling back onto a marshmallow meringue. It was so soft and light, dreamy, and to date possibly the most comfortable bed I have ever slept on. It was covered in white Egyptian cotton sheets and goose-down duvets. I noticed someone had covered our bedspread with lots of rose petals, and there was a towel on the end of the bed shaped into a swan, along with a couple of chocolate nougat sweets on the pillows. If that wasn't enough extravagant spoiling for you, the tiny, well-appointed little kitchenette, which was barely large enough to swing a cat, boasted a sizable red refrigerator, stacked full of delicious festive fare, that me and my husband would get to thoroughly enjoy. Packets of smoked salmon, cream cheese, bagels, ribbons of pasta, cream sauces, chocolate soufflés, fresh pallets of strawberries, and bottles of French champagne. Life did not get better than this. The temperature had dipped considerably. Winter was peering at us from the very next corner, but we did not need an excuse to get a merry fire going on in the hearth. We inordinately indulged ourselves in ribbons of creamy mushroom and truffle pasta, and drank liberal amounts of French champagne, while watching the fire crackle and spit as it hungrily burnt down the wood. Isn't it amazing how cosy you can be, snuggled up under a blanket by a fire, drinking French champagne, and feeling no need to talk, for the mere utterance of words would do much to spoil and sabotage the tranquillity of such a blissful moment. It was like that for the both of us. The tranquil world outside our cabin had become dark and dingy. A soft scattering of moonlight seemed to impertinently slice itself through the trees. My husband yawned and said, "Right, I think I'm going to bed now. Are you coming?" It was difficult to prise myself out of the comfortable settee, but I managed to drag myself to my feet, with the help of my husband's stretched out hand. When I flopped out on that marshmallow bed, it was so light and airy, I must have floated into La-La Land almost immediately. It was in the middle of the night when I opened my eyes, and that was when I saw her, standing at the end of my bed. A young woman in a white dress. She was pale, with long floating black hair and bright green eyes. She had a haunted expression on her face, and she was whispering, "Help me! Help me! Please help me!" She was indicating for me to follow her, but I became very alarmed. Nothing like this had happened to me since I was 7 years old. I stared at her for a moment in confoundment, unable to believe what I was seeing, and hurriedly threw the duvet over my head, refusing to resurface until the following morning. Isn't it funny how we can lie to ourselves, pretend we never saw something that we actually did? The following morning I told myself it had all been a dream, but somewhere in the back of my mind I knew that this had been no dream at all. Someone wanted my attention, would not leave me alone. It stuck to me presciently, like a blood-sucking leech that refused to let go. "What's the matter?" asked my husband. "You've gone as white as a sheet." "Nothing," I said, shrugging my shoulders nonchalantly and planting a half-hearted smile on my face. "Nothing," I said again. "I just thought, someone was watching us. That's all." "You and your imagination, Haley," said my husband, giving me a grin. "It's a good job you got me here to bring you crash-landing to earth, or you might just float away with the fairies," he giggled, and I began chasing after him in the water. "I'll get you for that! I'll get you for that!" Finally, exhausted and tired from our childish shenanigans, we left the stream, but I kept clandestinely glancing through the trees. Someone was definitely watching us. I knew it with every fibre of my being. But when I looked towards the direction of the trees, nothing was there. Was I going completely mad? Even when we walked back towards the cabin, I was overwhelmed with the bodeful sense that we were being stalked, as when we crunched our feet over the fresh fallen autumn leaves, something or someone else appeared to be doing much the same, in perfect sequence with us. But I told myself that my husband was right. My imagination was taunting and teasing me. Of course there was nothing there. What was I like? The rest of that blissfully idyllic afternoon was spent cosily toasting our feet by the crackling fire, luxuriating on dreamy couches, reading fictional books, drinking blissful cups of delicious hot cocoa topped with miniature marshmallows, and then finally seduced by our languished blandishment and weariness that was dragging down the blinds of our eyes and hinting that sleep would be gladly welcomed, I knew that if me and my husband did not turn in for the night, we would likely wake up on the couches the following morning, and missing out on that king-size bed in the master bedroom was not an option for us. Later that night I awoke to feel someone prodding me. I looked up and there was nothing there. And then I saw her, the very same young woman I'd seen the night before, but there was a desperation to her expression. She was indicating for me to follow her. I no longer felt afraid. I could sense this woman was a troubled ghost, and she seemed to need my help. Not that I knew that I could possibly help her, but I'd try anyway. I glanced briefly at my husband Luke, who was obliviously lying fast asleep in the bed, and I wondered if his eyes were open, would he see the ghost as clearly as I did, or would he see her at all? I decided to let him sleep, as I hurriedly grabbed a white toweling robe from the bathroom and tied the belt around my middle, and slipped my feet into a pair of walking boots. The ghost had gone, but reappeared, and was still indicating for me to follow her. Sometimes she was as real as you or me, and then there were times that she would become so opaque that you could see directly through her like a pane of glass. I got the profound sense that the ghost wanted to show me something significant, but just when I thought she was gone, she would reappear again and again, with her hands incessantly gesturing for me to follow her. So follow her I did. I opened the cabin door very quietly. It screeched and groaned upon opening. It obviously really needed an oiling. I was greeted to the soft blasts of wind. Leaves brushed past my skin breezily, and fingers of cold, fast-moving air nudged me. I grabbed the torch and followed the ghostly figure through the trees. I noticed her night-dress seemed to shimmer like a fluorescent light. Where was she taking me to, I wondered, and was I completely insane to be following a ghost? I probably was. Even I was beginning to question my own sanity. It was tenebrific under the canopy of the trees, as most of the moonlight was expunged, so even the forest shrubbery had become like vague impressions on the landscape that had almost been blotted out by the darkness. It was like being at the bottom of the ocean, where you can't see a single thing. I felt almost as if the trees on every side of me were closing in on me, as the darkness seemed to be oppressively suffocating. I would have gladly turned around and run back to the cabin at once. I really did not like being out here in the middle of the night, and I don't mind admitting that my heart was banging violently against the wall of my chest. The forest at night felt bodefully menacing, very menacious. The frogs and crickets serenaded the night with their tuneful orchestra, but the feeling of being watched was so overwhelming. It crawled over my back and tingled down my spine and refused to leave me the hell alone. Someone was watching me, and I don't believe it was the ghost. It was someone else. I had been following the ghost for a while, and I manoeuvred my feet over the blankets of crunchy leaves on the earthen floor. And then the ghost seemed to just disappear. Where was she? I had come out here in the middle of the night. I was in a clearing, where thankfully the moon spilled through the trees and lit up the vegetation. But the ghostly entity was nowhere to be seen. Where was she? Why had she dragged me out here in the middle of the night? "I'm sorry," I called out. "I don't know who you are or what you wanted to show me, but I'm going back to the cabin. Please don't bug me again. I need to get a good night's sleep." I was feeling slightly peeved with the ghost. I'd been called out by a ghost into a very intimidating woodgrove devoid of much light, and now the ghost had pretty much vanished and was nowhere to be found. I was not remotely amused. Thank God Luke was fast asleep, I thought. What would he think of me wandering off in the middle of the night to follow a ghost? He would probably think I'd lost leave of my senses. And I think he would be right. All of a sudden I heard a very ominous thumping sound, as if something was beating the ground very hard. What the hell was that? The sound was threatening. I don't mind admitting I nearly wet myself in terror. I had the overwhelming sense that something monstrously big was moving towards me, that was substantial both in size and girth, something remarkably intimidating, very dangerous. The ground heaved and groaned, as if someone was treading across rotting floorboards that were cracking apart. The feet moved towards me. Leaves were being steadily crunched. In that moment I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. My knees buckled beneath me, and my heart felt as if I was being pulverized by my fear. My chest was so tight I felt as if I couldn't breathe. I needed to run, get away from here as fast as I could. But it was as if my feet were rooted to the ground, refusing to move, even though my knees crumbled beneath me. I was helpless like a frightened mouse in the presence of a large cat, completely frozen by my terror, incapable of even moving a muscle. Then there he was standing before me, and there are no words. I was standing face to face with a Bigfoot, and in this creature's towering presence, I felt as inconspicuous and small as a tiny ant. I stared up at the Bigfoot in horror, my eyes growing as round as saucers. I was unable to fully digest what I was perceiving. This was a dream. It had to be. In any moment I would wake up. But no, this was no dream. This was real. The Bigfoot was easily 9 foot tall, exuding an all-male energy. He was powerful, majestic, lofty, built like an army tank. His long, flowing dark hair was as black as the night, but his face with its high cheekbones, flat nose, and heavily furrowed forehead was so human. He stood there very still, staring at me curiously through eyes that gave off a bright yellow eyeshine. And then in a booming baritone voice, he spoke to me in an incomprehensible foreign dialect. But his words were as soothing as an antiseptic lotion, for there were kindness in those words that were spoken with eloquence, with feeling, and emotional integrity. The Bigfoot was clearly not going to hurt me. I could relax. I do not know how I understood what he was saying to me, but I did. Akila kwasana, olo kilata. I'm so glad you have come. We have been waiting for you for a long time. You've been waiting for me? I asked aghast, not making any sense of his strange words. Kilatila kwasinakolo, hagilani sokola, sikatilapi. We've been waiting for those like you that can see beyond the veil, for not many of your kind can do so. I need you to follow me, he said, and then he moved towards a large tree and pointed to the ground. He tapped it with his sizable foot. Kilatikaswa. She is here, he told me. Who is here? I asked him. Dilatikaswa nikolosha. Gika nikolomoko. Ikisatwashanako. Hagila nikoloma. Hilifakasana. The woman who led you into the woods. She was killed here. She wants her family to know where her remains may be found. I hope you will give her the closure she seeks. Kelatilakwana hassa. I told her I would speak to you about her dilemma. You mean the ghost of the woman that I followed into the wood grove? This is where she's buried. This is where her remains can be found. Is this what you're telling me? How was she killed? Ikakisakwasa. This is where she will be found. She was hit over the head and buried here. The Bigfoot patted me on the back. Kilantikaswa homokolanika. Please give her the closure she seeks. And with that he turned around and glided away, swinging his arms backwards and forwards. When the Bigfoot had finally gone, I had to pinch myself many times over to convince myself that what had transpired actually was real. I walked back steadily to the cabin, casually kicking up autumn leaves, no longer fearful of the dark, as my thoughts were entirely focused on the woman I'd seen. She wanted closure, and a Bigfoot had spoken to me on behalf of her. Are you kidding me? Did things get any weirder than this? The next morning, Luke commented that I seemed to be very distracted, almost as if my mind was miles away, but in truth it was. "Why aren't you eating your croissant? It's still warm," he told me. "You've been playing with it for the last 20 minutes. What's up?" All of a sudden there was a knock at our cabin door, and me and Luke went to answer it. The woman standing at the door was smiling at us warmly, but the moment I saw her, my blood ran cold. She looked exactly like the ghost I'd seen the night before, the woman who was buried in the woodgrove. This could not be happening to me. This was seriously weird. The young woman was wearing a pair of jeans, a sweater, and a pair of sneakers, and she said, "Hi, I'm Pippa. I just wanted to know if there's anything you need, and to ask you how you're enjoying your stay at the cabin." "Oh," I said, shaking my hair like a pigeon's feathers. "It's wonderful here, wonderful. You've thought of absolutely everything. The place is absolutely bewitching, and we've had a whale of a time here, haven't we, Luke?" "Yes, we have," said Luke. "The place is utterly charming." "I'm glad to hear that," said the young woman, looking at me inquisitively. "Do you mind me asking you, but you look very pale. Are you sure you're all right?" "Well, not really. You look like someone I've seen, someone I saw last night. A ghost, actually. Do you know of anybody that you resemble that might just be dead?" This time Pippa paled. My Aunt Layla. People say I'm the spitting image of her. We do believe she's dead. Her body was never found, you see. She went missing when I was 18 years old." "I know this sounds strange, what I'm telling you," I said. "When I was younger, I could see dead people. I thought I'd lost that gift. But your aunt's ghost, well, she appeared to me last night in the cabin. She told me to follow her into the woods. She needs closure, you see. She wants her family to know where they can find her remains. I was shown the spot where she was buried last night. I know it sounds crazy. You probably think I'm as mad as a hatter, and am completely bonkers, and I really don't blame you for thinking that. But I promise you, this happened to me last night. I have no explanation for any of this." My husband Luke and Pippa both stared at me, as if I was speaking a foreign language, and for a long time no one said anything, until my husband interjected. "Oh, I hope my wife hasn't upset you. I'm very sorry about this, Pippa. I'm sure there's nothing to her claims. Maybe she imagined the whole thing." "No, I don't think she did. You know, I knew when we got that cancellation for the cabin, which never happens, that something was up. You were meant to come here. And you believe you know where to find my aunt's remains? That's incredible. Do you mind showing me where we can find them? I'll get my husband to dig up the spot." "I don't mind lending a hand as well," Luke offered. "But I want to tell you, Pippa, please don't get your hopes up. Just in case, we're chasing after a mirage, if you understand what I'm saying." A short while later, my husband Luke was helping Pippa's husband dig up the ground, which was hard and unyielding. But sure enough, we uncovered the remains of what was believed the long-since missing body of Layla Sutton. I remember we held our breath when Luke lifted up the bones like an archaeologist, brushing them gently and placing them in a bag. "I think we can safely say we found your Aunt Layla Sutton, and if these aren't her remains, then there's someone else," Luke said. "And I'm sure we can find out through DNA analysis who these bones belong to." "I know they belong to my aunt. I just know they do," said Pippa. If Luke was ever cynical about the supernatural, uncovering Layla's remains made him question everything he knew about our world. He does not doubt that not only did I encounter Layla's ghost, but a Bigfoot as well, who clearly had the ability to see beyond the veil, and was eager to help a tortured soul that desperately needed closure in order to rest in peace. In some bizarre, rather curious way, I must have been called to the cabin supernaturally to help close a 40-year-old case. The family always suspected they knew what had happened to Layla, but their beliefs were hearsay. But it would soon be confirmed in the coroner's report that the remains had indeed belonged to Layla Sutton. 2 years before Layla's death, she had met a man whom she described as the perfect one for her. "I have met the most incredible man," she told her parents with wide, excited eyes. "His name is Harris Montgomery. He rides a Harley Davidson. Isn't that cool? Can you believe I've met someone like that? He always wears a leather jacket. I love men who wear leather jackets." Layla's mother had encouraged her daughter to invite him over to dinner. "Well, if you feel this way about him, sweetheart, then he must come to dinner so we can meet him ourselves. He sounds quite wonderful." Pippa's mother, Rebecca, promptly told us that her parents had grievous misgivings about her sister's boyfriend. "I don't like him," Layla's mother had told Rebecca. "There's something about him that gives me the chills. I don't like the way he put his hand on Layla throughout the meal, as if he had some kind of ownership over her. It was very disturbing. I worry that he's one of those controlling men." It would seem that Layla's mother's ominous words took root, because sure enough, Layla found herself caught up in an insufferable relationship with Harris. "I remember my sister would have all these bruises all over her," Rebecca told me. "She'd make all these stories up about how she'd walked into a door. But she'd never been clumsy a day in her life, so I didn't buy any of her stories." Eventually, Layla did confess through copious tears that she hated Harris Montgomery, who was a big bully and had been beating her up all this time. I hasten to say my father went over to see Harris himself and told him to stay well away from my sister or he would kill him. He was so furious, he very nearly did beat up Harris Montgomery. "I will kill him," he growled, "for daring to lay a hand on my precious, precious daughter. That man is a monster, and I will make him rue the day that he was ever born. See if I don't." But my mother kept saying, "Rolf, for God's sake, listen to yourself. You can't do anything stupid. Promise me that. I don't want you ending up in prison over this. That would be crazy." Rebecca told us that her father had dutifully kept his promise to his wife and had not beaten up Harris Montgomery, despite being very tempted to do so. It would seem Harris Montgomery had assured my father he wanted nothing more to do with my sister Layla, which brought him a great deal of relief. In truth, he had lied to my father and religiously began stalking my sister, following her wherever she went, causing her a great deal of stress. Layla was so dismayed about being followed by her ex-boyfriend that she had filed some reports at the police station, telling them that her boyfriend Harris Montgomery was refusing to leave her alone. "I think he might hurt me," she told them. "He's very angry because I'm dating a new person. He's a very jealous man. I'm so afraid he's going to kill me. You don't know what he's like. The man is seriously unhinged." I believe the police thought Layla was being a tad dramatic and did not take her desperate claims very seriously. At the time, the Sutton family lived at the main farmhouse on the property, where me and my boyfriend Luke had rented out a cabin for our anniversary weekend. They still lived on the extensive property when I first met Pippa and was introduced to her mother. Pippa's mother and her sister Layla had grown up on the farm as children, so the cabin we were renting was very old indeed, and had been enjoyed by the entire Sutton family for many years, before it was ever rented out. One day when Layla was the only one on the property, as her sister and parents had gone to a local fair in town, they returned home to find that Layla had vanished, and no one knew what had happened to her. The police suspected that Harris Montgomery was behind her disappearance, but he claimed to have a staunch alibi for the day she vanished. But we believe he got someone to lie on his behalf and give a false witness. Several years later he died in an accident on his Harley Davidson, so the family felt that karma had finally caught up with him. The family had looked for Layla everywhere, and they had no idea where her remains could be found, and were surprised to discover that they were in the woodgrove all along. No one knows exactly what happened to her, but the coroner was able to affirm that there was a blunt force injury to her skull, as if she'd been beaten very hard with a baseball bat. Pippa's mother told me that she suspected that Harris Montgomery had been spying on their family farmhouse for quite some time. Once he knew Layla was on her own at the family property, he decided to wreak his revenge on her, and paid her a visit, bludgeoning her over the head and burying her on the family property. I was naturally pleased to have been of help to the family, to find their closure, as Layla had a memorial service, and finally her remains were reburied on the family plot. To this day I remain good friends with Pippa Sutton and her family. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.